Was the final, desperate peace of a European summer shattered by a genuine diplomatic failure, or was it meticulously dismantled by a fiction? In the waning days of August in the year 1939, the world held its breath as Germany sought to compel an immediate satisfaction of its demands upon Poland, a nation caught in the tightening vice of history. The crisis had been simmering since March of that same year, when the Nazi dictator of Germany, Adolf Hitler, had first issued his stark claims. He demanded the cession of the free city of Danzig, a port city with a complex international status, and insisted upon the creation of German highways across the Polish corridor, a strip of land that separated the main body of Germany from its province of East Prussia. These highways were to be extraterritorial, a term signifying that they would be sovereign German territory slicing directly through the heart of Poland, a concession Warsaw could never make. Poland flatly refused these demands, understanding them not as a final settlement but as the first step toward total subjugation. In response to this clear and present danger, the Polish government astutely secured guarantees from both France and Great Britain, who pledged to defend Poland against any act of German aggression. As the summer heat began to fade, the diplomatic conflict reached its fever pitch. The German government crafted what would become known as its ultimatum to Poland, a list of 16 specific points or demands designed to resolve the issue on Germany's terms. This document called for the immediate return of the free city of Danzig to the German Reich, arguing that its purely German character and the supposed unanimous will of its population made such a transfer an undeniable necessity. Furthermore, the ultimatum addressed the contentious territory of the Polish corridor itself, the land bounded by the Baltic Sea and a line running through the towns of Marienwerder, Graudenz, Kulm, and Bromberg before turning west toward Schonlanke. The German proposal was that this entire region should decide its own fate through a plebiscite, a direct vote by the populace to determine whether it would become part of Germany or remain with Poland. The German government framed these proposals as a noble attempt to find a final solution to what it described as an intolerable situation. The causes for this crisis, according to Berlin, were twofold: the unbearable demarcation of frontiers dictated by the Treaty of Versailles at the end of the First World War, and the equally intolerable treatment of the German minority living in the territories that had been cut off from the Reich. The stated aim was to put an end to the geopolitical friction, secure vital lines of communication for both nations, and eliminate the problem of ethnic minorities. Where the minority issue could not be completely resolved through territorial changes, Germany claimed its goal was to render the fate of these populations bearable by effectively guaranteeing their rights. However, a closer examination of the 16 points revealed a profound disingenuousness at the heart of the German position. One particular clause laid bare the true intention behind the seemingly democratic offer of a plebiscite. In order to secure Germany's unrestricted communication with its province of Danzig, East Prussia, and to guarantee Poland's access to the sea, the proposal stipulated a crucial condition that would apply irrespective of the plebiscite's result. Should the territory vote to remain with Poland, Germany would be granted an extraterritorial traffic zone, a corridor of its own running from a location like Butow to Danzig or Dirschau. Within this zone, Germany would have the right to construct a grand motor highway, a Reichsautobahn, and a substantial railway line with 4 tracks. This meant that even if Poland won the vote, its sovereignty would be compromised, its territory bisected by a corridor of German control over which it had no jurisdiction. Poland's refusal of such demands was therefore rooted in a legitimate fear that it would lose its de facto access to the sea, become a subjugated satellite state beholden to Berlin, and inevitably face a new wave of German demands in the future. The diplomatic endgame was a masterclass in cynical theater. On the 29th of August 1939, Adolf Hitler informed the British ambassador Neville Henderson that he was prepared to resume negotiations with Poland. Yet, this offer came with an impossible condition. A Polish plenipotentiary, an envoy with the full authority to make binding agreements, was required to arrive in Berlin within a mere 24 hours. The British government, recognizing this for the ultimatum it was, made the fateful decision not to forward the demand to Warsaw until after the impossibly short deadline had already expired. The international crisis over Danzig and the Polish corridor had reached its zenith, and the machinery of war was beginning to turn. Complicating Hitler's timeline was the formalization of the Anglo-Polish Pact on the 25th of August. Britain signed the Polish-British Common Defense Pact, a treaty that solidified its earlier guarantees. Within a secret protocol of this agreement, the United Kingdom offered its assistance specifically in the case of an attack on Poland by Germany. The pact also bound both signatories not to enter into agreements with any third countries that could be considered a threat to the other. The signing of this robust defensive alliance directly impacted German planning, forcing Hitler to postpone his meticulously planned invasion of Poland from its original date of the 26th of August until the 1st of September. The final act of deception was played out for the world to hear. On the 1st of September 1939, German radio broadcast an announcement that its 16-point proposal had been presented to Poland and had been rejected. This was a calculated and outright lie. The demands had never been formally presented to the Polish government at all. The supposed rejection was a complete fabrication, a carefully constructed pretext designed to cast Poland as the intransigent party and Germany as the victim of diplomatic obstruction. This manufactured event served the exact same purpose as the false flag raid on the Gleiwitz radio station, another staged incident carried out on the same day where German operatives posing as Polish partisans seized a German radio station to broadcast an anti-German message. Both events were designed to create a justification, however flimsy, for the invasion that was already set in motion. With its fabricated pretext in place, Germany invaded Poland on the 1st of September 1939, unleashing the full force of its military might and initiating the Second World War. In accordance with the defense treaties they had signed with Poland, Great Britain and France issued their own demands to Germany, insisting that it immediately withdraw its forces. When Germany rejected these final appeals for peace, the Allied powers fulfilled their solemn obligations. On the 3rd of September 1939, both Great Britain and France declared war on Germany, transforming a regional conflict into a global conflagration and sealing the fate of a generation. The intolerable frontiers of Versailles were about to be redrawn, not with ink, but with blood.
What does a nation do when faced with an impossible choice, caught between the jaws of military reality and political necessity? In the final, anxious years of the 1930s, this was the agonizing dilemma that confronted the Second Polish Republic as it scrambled to devise the defense against the looming shadow of Nazi Germany. The resulting strategy, known as Plan West, or Plan Zachód in Polish, was a testament to a nation's desperate attempt to prepare for a storm it had long seen gathering on the wrong horizon. For decades, under the iron-fisted rule of Marshal Józef Piłsudski, Poland's military gaze had been fixed firmly eastward, anticipating a potential onslaught from the Soviet Union. It was a strategic posture born from history and ideology, but one that grew dangerously obsolete with each passing year. Only after Piłsudski's death in the year 1935 did a new government and military leadership dare to reevaluate the geopolitical landscape. They came to the stark realization that their existing blueprint for a German conflict, a relic from the mid-1920s known as Plan S, was utterly inadequate for the threat posed by the resurgent and aggressive Third Reich. As German war plans took their final, sinister shape in the spring of 1939, the Polish defense strategy, which had been crystallizing throughout 1938, was born from a crucible of intense debate. At the heart of this controversy lay a fundamental soul-searching question. Should the Polish army attempt to defend the entirety of its long, vulnerable border with Germany, or should it execute a strategic withdrawal to the east and south, establishing a shorter, more defensible line anchored by major rivers? From a purely military standpoint, the second option was far more sound. It would have allowed Poland to concentrate its forces, avoid being thinly spread and easily encircled, and fight a war of attrition in terrain more favorable to the defender. Yet this cold military logic was ultimately overruled by the heated realities of politics. Polish politicians were haunted by the fear that a withdrawal would play directly into Hitler's hands. They worried that Germany might be satisfied with seizing only the territories it had long coveted, the free city of Danzig, the vital Polish corridor that provided access to the sea, and the industrial heartland of Silesia. If Poland voluntarily ceded these regions at the outset, Germany could potentially halt its advance, declare its objectives met, and pressure the international community for an early end to the war, leaving Poland dismembered, economically crippled, and humiliated without its allies ever firing a shot. As tensions escalated, Poland initiated a remarkably subtle and complex mobilization process, designed to bring its army to readiness without openly provoking a German attack. The first quiet steps began in March of 1939 with a secret card mobilization, a low-key call-up of key personnel. The situation intensified dramatically following the German occupation of the Czech Republic and Moravia. In response, on the 23rd of March 1939, Poland launched its first partial emergency mobilization. This summons, issued under red and yellow designations, was activated in military districts 4, centered on Lodz, and 9, centered on Brest. This initial phase brought 4 infantry divisions, 1 cavalry brigade, and numerous auxiliary units to a state of alert, a clear but still measured signal of Polish resolve. The process accelerated significantly later that summer. On the morning of the 24th of August 1939, a much larger secret mobilization commenced, a sweeping action that covered approximately 75% of the Polish army's total manpower, quietly transforming the nation onto a war footing. The final week of peace was a flurry of desperate activity. On the 23rd of August 1939, a full emergency mobilization was declared in 5 military districts, placing a formidable force of 18 infantry divisions, 2.5 reserve divisions, and 7 cavalry brigades on high alert. 4 days later, on the 27th of August 1939, the emergency mobilization was extended to the remaining unmobilized units, particularly in Districts 6 and 10. By the 29th of August 1939, the government declared a universal mobilization of all drafted recruits, the final step in preparing the entire nation for war. It was at this critical juncture, however, that Poland's own allies intervened in a shocking and demoralizing manner. Despite their treaty obligations, Great Britain and France exerted immense pressure on the Polish government to annul the mobilization, a last-ditch, naive attempt to appease Hitler and avert war. For a brief, agonizing moment, Warsaw complied, only to reverse course as the futility of appeasement became terrifyingly clear. The Polish government defiantly ordered the general mobilization to be resumed, set to go into effect on the 31st of August. The reprieve was tragically short-lived. In the early morning hours of the 1st of September 1939, fascist German forces stormed across the border. The intricate and carefully timed Polish mobilization was caught tragically incomplete. The formations that had been called up in the earlier emergency mobilizations were already on alert, but not all of them had successfully reached their designated deployment areas along the defensive front. For the vast majority of the troops, this was merely the second day of the general mobilization, a process that was now being carried out under the terrifying shriek of enemy bombs and the chaos of disrupted communications. Public transport, essential for moving men and material to the front, became a prime target for the German Luftwaffe, and latecomers sustained devastating casualties before they could even reach their units. The consequences of this disrupted mobilization were catastrophic, effectively crippling Poland's ability to resist. The Polish army, which on paper consisted of approximately 1 million soldiers, never reached its full strength. By the 1st of September, only 70% of its planned forces had been successfully mobilized, meaning that roughly 900,000 of the 1,350,000 soldiers intended for the first wave of defense were available. This shortfall meant that many units were still in the process of forming or were scattered and struggling to move towards their frontline positions when the German onslaught began. The late and interrupted mobilization is estimated to have reduced the overall combat capability of the Polish army by a staggering 1/3 before the first shot was even fired in earnest. In 1939, Poland possessed a large army with 283,000 soldiers on active duty, organized into 37 infantry divisions, 11 cavalry brigades, and 2 armored brigades, supplemented by substantial artillery units. Behind this standing army stood a reserve pool of another 700,000 men. The military's most significant weakness, however, was a chronic lack of funds. The nation's limited defense budget permitted only minimal mechanization, leaving the army heavily reliant on horse-drawn transport and foot infantry. While most weapons were produced domestically, a point of national pride, the production rate was painfully low, and a scarcity of foreign exchange severely limited the purchase of more advanced equipment from abroad. The 7TP tank serves as a prime example of this industrial constraint. It was a capable light tank for its time, but too few could be produced to make a decisive impact. The entirety of Poland's tank force was modest, consisting of just 2 armored brigades, 4 independent tank battalions, and around 30 companies of small TKS tankettes, which were attached to infantry divisions and cavalry brigades for reconnaissance and support. The standard tank of the Polish army during the invasion was this very 7TP light tank, a symbol of a nation's valiant but ultimately under-resourced effort to stand against the most powerful mechanized army the world had ever seen.
Had the promises been enough? In the chilling silence that followed the fall of Czechoslovakia, as German troops marched into Prague on the 16th of March 1939, a profound and terrifying realization dawned upon the governments of France and Britain. The policy of appeasement, the desperate hope that concessions could satisfy the insatiable territorial ambitions of Adolf Hitler, had utterly and catastrophically failed. The violation of the Munich Agreement was not merely a broken promise. It was a clear signal that Nazi Germany's ambitions would not be contained by diplomacy alone. A line had to be drawn, a firm and unambiguous stand taken to discourage any further aggression in Europe. The continent held its breath, and the focus of this new hardened resolve turned toward the nation now squarely in the path of the German war machine, Poland. It was in this atmosphere of grave urgency that the British Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, stood before the House of Commons on the 31st of March 1939. The man so closely associated with the now discredited policy of appeasement delivered a statement that would irrevocably alter the course of European history. He declared with solemn finality that, in the event of any action which clearly threatened Polish independence, and which the Polish government accordingly considered it vital to resist, His Majesty's government would feel themselves bound at once to lend the Polish government all support in their power. This was no vague expression of solidarity. It was a direct and public guarantee of sovereignty, a pledge of military assistance. Across the English Channel, the French government, equally shaken by the events in Czechoslovakia, quickly and publicly endorsed this British pledge, presenting a seemingly united front against further German expansion. The era of placating the aggressor was over. The era of the guarantee had begun. Yet, a verbal promise, even one delivered with the full weight of the British and French governments, was one thing. A binding military pact was another. As the spring of 1939 bled into a tense and anxious summer, efforts were made to formalize these commitments into ironclad treaties. France, for its part, already possessed a long-standing relationship with Poland, rooted in the Franco-Polish military alliance that had been active since the early 1920s. To reinforce this historic bond in the face of the present danger, a new convention was signed in Paris on the 19th of May, 1939. This agreement, known as the Kasprzycki-Gamelin Convention, explicitly obligated the armies of France and Poland to provide mutual aid in the event of a war with Germany. The French general Maurice Gamelin went even further, making a specific and audacious promise to his Polish counterparts. He assured them of a bold relief offensive to be launched within 3 weeks of any German attack. To leave no room for doubt, the French government issued a powerful statement affirming its commitment. That the Franco-Polish alliance is, moreover, confirmed in the same spirit by the French government and the Polish government.
France and Poland guarantee each other immediate and direct aid against any threat, direct or indirect, which might aim a blow at their vital interests. The words immediate and direct were chosen to convey a sense of swift and decisive action. Meanwhile, Great Britain moved to codify its own guarantee. On the 25th of August, 1939, with war clouds gathering ominously, the military alliance between the United Kingdom and Poland was officially formalized through the Anglo-Polish Agreement. This was a pact for mutual assistance, designed with one specific scenario in mind: a military invasion from Nazi Germany. The core of this solemn treaty was contained within its first article. Article 1. Should one of the contracting parties become engaged in hostilities with a European power in consequence of aggression by the latter against that contracting party, the other contracting party will at once give the contracting party engaged in hostilities all the support and assistance in its power. The language was absolute, promising the full might of the British Empire in Poland's defense. The agreement was further solidified by a secret protocol, a confidential addendum outlining the specific understandings and military coordinations that were too sensitive for public disclosure, underscoring the deadly seriousness of the pact. Despite the strength of these written guarantees and the solemnness of the promises made, a crippling and tragic limitation lay at their heart. In the stark reality of military logistics and geography, neither Britain nor France was in a position to offer the kind of immediate, tangible support that could actually stop a German invasion in its tracks. A naval blockade would time to have an effect, and launching a major land offensive on Germany's Western Front, as General Gamelin had promised, was a monumental undertaking that could not be executed overnight. The guarantees provided immense political and moral weight, but they offered little practical on-the-ground protection for the Polish army in the opening days of a conflict. The shield of words, however strong, was still just words. The inevitable moment of truth arrived with the dawn of the 1st of September. As German forces stormed across the Polish border, the intricate web of alliances and guarantees was put to the ultimate test. The British government, true to its word, acted immediately. A final, unambiguous note was delivered to the German government, an ultimatum that left no room for misinterpretation. It stated that, unless the German government are prepared to give His Majesty's government satisfactory assurances that the German government have suspended all aggressive action against Poland and are prepared promptly to withdraw their forces from Polish territory, His Majesty's government in the United Kingdom will without hesitation fulfill their obligations to Poland. The demand was clear: cease the attack and pull back, or face war with the British Empire. The world waited. No such undertaking was received from Berlin. The deadline passed in silence. Consequently, on the 3rd of September 1939, Great Britain and France, honoring the pledges they had made, formally declared war on Germany. The promises on paper had been fulfilled, and in doing so, they had plunged Europe, and soon the world, into its second Great War in a generation. Was the cataclysm that engulfed the world in the mid-20th century ignited by a grand battle, a defiant stand, or a formal declaration of hostilities? What if instead the first true act of the Second World War in Europe was a lie, whispered into a microphone in a quiet border town, orchestrated with the cold precision of a stage play, and sealed with the blood of an innocent man? This is the chilling story of Operation Himmler, a masterclass in deception so cynical and profound that it provided the manufactured justification for a conflict that would claim tens of millions of lives. The operation, a series of meticulously planned false flag undertakings, was designed by the highest echelons of Nazi Germany in the late summer of 1939 for a single, sinister purpose: to fabricate the appearance of Polish aggression against Germany, thereby painting the impending German invasion as a righteous act of self-defense. The plan was the dark brainchild of Heinrich Himmler, the Reichsführer of the Schutzstaffel, or SS, and it was named after him accordingly.
The operational supervision of this intricate web of deceit fell to Reinhard Heydrich, a man whose ruthless efficiency would become infamous, while the day-to-day management was handled by Heinrich Müller, the head of the Gestapo. Together, this triumvirate of terror set in motion a project, also known by the chillingly mundane codename Operation Konserve, whose goal was to create a cascade of seemingly authentic provocations along the German-Polish border. Adolf Hitler, in endorsing this scheme, likely harbored a dual hope. Primarily, the manufactured Polish aggression would serve as the perfect casus belli, a publicly defensible reason to unleash the full might of the German military. Secondarily, he might have calculated that the ruse would sow confusion and doubt among Poland's powerful allies, the United Kingdom and France, perhaps causing them to hesitate, to delay, or even to abandon their treaty obligations to declare war on Germany. The entire affair was a gamble, a high-stakes geopolitical performance where truth was the first casualty. The night of the 31st of August, 1939 was the chosen moment for the curtain to rise on this deadly theater. Along the tense border, a series of coordinated incidents unfolded, each one a carefully crafted piece of the larger mosaic of deception. These were not random acts of violence, but calculated operations carried out by elite agents of the SS and the SD, the security service of the Nazi Party. German troops, their own uniforms exchanged for the unfamiliar garb of the Polish military, would descend upon various border buildings. Their mission was not conquest, but chaos. They would storm these locations, firing their weapons with deliberate inaccuracy to maximize fear and confusion among the local German populace without causing strategic damage. They would engage in acts of wanton vandalism, smashing property and creating a scene of violent disorder before making a swift retreat. To complete the illusion, they would leave behind the most gruesome of props. Dead bodies, also dressed in Polish uniforms, presented as supposed evidence of the attackers who had been slain while carrying out their assault. These bodies were the horrifying reality behind the operation's alternate name, Operation Konserve, a German word for canned goods. This macabre term was the SS's internal slang for the prisoners taken from concentration camps who were to be used in these staged attacks. These unfortunate souls were the ultimate pawns in the Nazi scheme. They were dressed in Polish uniforms, murdered in cold blood, often by a lethal injection or a simple gunshot, and then their corpses were strategically placed at the scenes of the fake skirmishes. They were the canned goods, disposable products to be opened and used as needed to lend a veneer of authenticity to the fabricated Polish aggression. This practice was not limited to a single location. It was a systematic component of the broader operation, which included other orchestrated events like the burning of a house in the Polish corridor and the dissemination of spurious propaganda, all timed to create a crescendo of perceived hostility on that fateful August night. Of all the 1939 false flag undertakings that constituted Operation Himmler, one has become indelibly etched into the annals of history as the quintessential example of this perfidy, the Gleiwitz Incident. This specific action is the best-known component of the operation and serves as a microcosm of the entire diabolical plan. On that same night of the 31st of August, a small specialized group of German operatives, led by an SS officer named Alfred Naujax, covertly approached the Gleiwitz radio station, a German facility located very close to the Polish border. Like their counterparts in other locations, they were disguised in Polish military uniforms. After seizing control of the station, they didn't hold it for long. Their objective was informational, not territorial. They broadcast a short, inflammatory, anti-German message spoken in the Polish language intended to be heard by German citizens and to be reported as an outrageous act of foreign belligerence. To make their elaborate fiction utterly convincing, the SS required a body, a tangible victim, to sell the story of a violent Polish raid. For this role, they selected Francisco Honiak, a 43-year-old unmarried German farmer of Polish descent who had been arrested the previous day. He was a man with no connection to the military or the conflict, an ordinary citizen chosen to be the silent star in their morbid production. The SS officers dressed his unconscious body in a Polish uniform, murdered him, and then left his corpse at the entrance of the transmitter station. To the world, he was meant to be seen as a Polish saboteur killed in the act of attacking a German radio station. In reality, he was the first named victim of a war that had not yet officially begun, his death a calculated element of propaganda.
When Adolf Hitler addressed the Reichstag the following morning on the 1st of September, he did not specifically mention the Gleiwitz Incident by name. To do so might have invited scrutiny of a single event. Instead, with masterful and malevolent rhetoric, he grouped the Gleiwitz attack with all the other provocations meticulously staged by the SS, presenting them to the German people and the world as an intolerable and widespread Polish assault on the German nation. The lie had served its purpose. That very day, Germany launched Fall White, or Case White, the fully developed strategic plan for the invasion of Poland. The tanks rolled, the planes flew, and the invasion began. This act of aggression, predicated on a foundation of carefully constructed lies and the murder of innocents like Francisek Honiak, was the spark that precipitated the Second World War in Europe, a global conflagration born from a whisper of deceit over a provincial radio station. What if the first act of the Second World War was not a battle, but a lie? What if the cataclysm that would consume the globe and claim tens of millions of lives was ignited not by an army crossing a border in an act of transparent aggression, but by a carefully staged piece of theater, a deception so cynical and cold-blooded that its architects used murder as a mere stage prop? On the quiet night of the 31st of August, 1939, in the small German border town of Gleiwitz, a local radio station was thrust from obscurity onto the world stage, becoming the centerpiece of one of history's most infamous false flag operations. This meticulously planned event, known as the Gleiwitz Incident, was a manufactured attack, a piece of deadly fiction designed by Nazi Germany to provide a casus belli, a term used to describe a justification for acts of war against its eastern neighbor, Poland. The invasion that was unleashed just hours later, on the 1st of September 1939, would mark the definitive beginning of the Second World War, a conflict born from a carefully constructed falsehood broadcast over the airwaves. The sinister plot at Gleiwitz was not an isolated scheme, but a single, crucial component of a much larger and more elaborate campaign of deception, codenamed Operation Himmler. This sprawling operation was the brainchild of some of the most ruthless figures in the Third Reich, overseen directly by Heinrich Himmler, the dreaded head of the SS, and executed with chilling precision by his subordinate Reinhard Heydrich, the chief of the Reich Main Security Office. The fundamental purpose of Operation Himmler was to fabricate a compelling and undeniable narrative of Polish aggression against Germany. To achieve this, Heydrich's operatives were tasked with staging a series of provocations all along the German-Polish border. These manufactured incidents, numbering around 24 in total, were designed to create a mosaic of hostility, painting Poland as a reckless and belligerent aggressor. The staged events included acts of sabotage against German infrastructure, simulated border skirmishes where German forces would defend themselves against non-existent attackers, and other calculated acts of violence, all meticulously documented to serve as evidence for the German public and the world. The ultimate goal was to create an atmosphere of crisis so severe that Germany's subsequent invasion of Poland would appear not as a predatory conquest, but as a necessary and justified defensive action. Much of what the world now knows about the inner workings of the Gleiwitz incident comes directly from the sworn testimony of a key participant, SS Sturmbannführer Alfred Najax, who provided a detailed affidavit at the Nuremberg trials after the war.
In his chillingly bureaucratic account, Najax confirmed that he had personally organized and led the raid on the radio station, acting on direct orders from both Reinhard Heydrich and Heinrich Müller, the notorious chief of the Gestapo. The plan was as simple as it was audacious. On that fateful evening, Najax led a small group of SS operatives, all disguised in the uniforms of Polish soldiers, to the Sender Gleiwitz radio station. Their mission was codenamed Großmutter gestorben, a bizarrely mundane phrase meaning grandmother died, which served as the activation signal for the operation. Once inside, the disguised Germans stormed the facility, seized control, and broadcast a short, inflammatory anti-German message in the Polish language, ensuring the message was just long enough to be heard, but brief enough to suggest a chaotic, hastily executed raid by foreign partisans. However, for the deception to be truly convincing, it required more than just a faked broadcast. It needed bodies. The architects of Operation Himmler understood that the presence of casualties would lend a grim authenticity to their fabricated narrative. To this end, the Gestapo had made a special horrifying provision. Their chosen victim was Franziska Haniak, a 43-year-old unmarried farmer from Upper Silesia. Haniak was a Catholic known for his sympathies towards the Poles, a fact that likely sealed his fate. He was arrested by the Gestapo on the day before the attack and prepared for his unwitting role in the drama. On the night of the 31st of August, he was dressed in clothes designed to make him look like a saboteur, rendered unconscious with an injection of drugs, and then transported to the Gleiwitz radio station. There, he was murdered by gunshot. His body left sprawled at the scene to be discovered as the Polish attacker who had been killed during the skirmish. Franziska Haniak thus holds the tragic distinction of being one of the very first victims of the Second World War. His life extinguished not in the heat of battle, but as a cold, calculated element of a lie. Haniak was not the only one sacrificed that night. The SS had a ghoulishly cynical term for the other bodies they used to populate their fabricated crime scenes: Konserve, the German word for canned goods. This dehumanizing slang referred to prisoners taken from concentration camps, individuals whose lives were deemed utterly disposable by the regime. For the Gleiwitz Incident and other staged attacks under Operation Himmler, several prisoners from the Dachau concentration camp were selected. Like Haniak, they were dressed in Polish army uniforms, drugged, and then brought to the designated locations. Once there, they were killed, often by lethal injection or gunfire, and their bodies were strategically placed to support the official story. To prevent any possibility of future identification that could unravel the conspiracy, the faces of these victims were often grotesquely disfigured before they were left behind. These canned goods were the silent, brutal proof offered to the world of a Polish assault that had never actually happened. The propaganda machine of the Third Reich did not wait for dawn. Within hours of the staged event at Gleiwitz, German radio stations were already broadcasting the fabricated news across the nation. The reports were urgent and alarming. Polish soldiers, they claimed, had launched a brazen attack on German soil, hijacking the Gleiwitz station. A body, they reported, had been left on the steps, a testament to the failed but violent incursion. In the days that followed, Adolf Hitler seized upon this manufactured crisis. In his address to the Reichstag declaring war, he did not specifically mention the Gleiwitz incident by name, but instead masterfully wove it into a larger tapestry of aggression. He spoke of a series of border violations and provocations, grouping all the staged events of Operation Himmler into a single, overwhelming narrative of an alleged Polish assault on Germany. The lie had served its purpose. The carefully planted seeds of deception had bloomed into a full-fledged justification for war, providing the pretext for the German army to pour across the Polish border and plunge Europe, and soon the world, into a devastating 6-year conflict. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more. Comment below with your thoughts or what you want to see next.